They mocked her, doubted her, whispered behind her back, until one child changed everything. On a freezing night in South Chicago, a poor street violinist stepped into the wrong restaurant, and into the lives of people who never imagined they'd share a table with her. By dawn, one question would echo across a billionaire's dining room. How could a single sentence, spoken by a woman they dismissed, silence an entire table? The wind cut sharply through South Chicago that night, the kind of cold that made the streetlights buzz louder and the pavement shine like wet steel. Naomi Carter pulled her coat tighter around Micah's shoulders, trying to shield her 7-year-old son from the chill. His small hand clung to hers, warm but trembling, and she could tell he hadn't eaten enough. The boy didn't complain. He rarely did. But hunger had a way of dulling his steps, shortening his breaths, dimming the spark in his eyes. Naomi felt every bit of it like a bruise pressed straight into her heart. Lumiere rose at the corner like a glass palace. Gold light, polished doors, valet attendants in crisp uniforms. The kind of place people like them didn't step into. The kind of place that smelled like luxury even from the sidewalk. As they walked past, the doors swung open and a wave of warmth poured out, carrying the scent of roasted garlic, butter, and seared steak. Micah slowed. Naomi felt his hand slip from hers. Before she could react, the boy drifted forward as if drawn by a string. She whispered urgently, "Micah, honey, no, stay close." But he was already moving across the patio, his eyes wide. A group of wealthy diners sat around a long table draped in white linen. Their laughter rang out like clinking glassware. Suits, evening gowns, glittering watches. Everything that felt impossibly far from their world. Micah stepped toward them, too small, too thin, too hungry. He lifted his chin, his voice barely more than a breath. "Sir, may I have some food?" It was as if a needle scratched across a record. The table fell silent. Heads turned, not in gentle concern, but in sharp disbelief. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Forks dangled mid-air. Naomi's stomach dropped. She felt exposed on display, like a spotlight had burned straight through her. A gasp came from a woman in a fur shawl. A man muttered, "Are they begging here now?" Someone else whispered something Naomi couldn't make out, but she heard the tone. Disgust masquerading as surprise, annoyance dressed as superiority. Naomi rushed forward, grabbing Micah's shoulder and pulling him close. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, breathless, mortified. "He didn't mean. He's just tired. Please." But the restaurant manager was already storming over, breaking through the heated patio lights like a thundercloud. His polished shoes clicked sharply, each step a reprimand. "Ma'am, you cannot be here," he snapped. "This is private dining. Please remove yourselves immediately." A few guests nodded in approval, as if he were doing something noble by tossing out a mother and child. Someone tapped their wineglass impatiently, eager for the interruption to end so the evening could return to its insulated perfection. Heat crawled up Naomi's neck. She felt every stare like a slap. She pulled Micah behind her, shielding him instinctively, though from what? Humiliation, hostility, shame? She couldn't say. "We're leaving," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry. We're leaving now." But just as she turned to go, something else happened. At the far end of the table, a man who hadn't spoken or reacted finally lifted his gaze. He looked different from the others. Not because he was younger or older, better dressed or worse, but because he didn't stare at Naomi like she was trash blown in from the street. He didn't look at Micah with annoyance or suspicion. He wasn't looking at them at all. His pale gray eyes were fixed on the violin case slung across Naomi's back. He studied it as though it were the most important detail in the entire scene. Not the hungry child. Not the embarrassed mother. Not the outraged diners. Just the violin, old, scratched, taped at one corner, but deeply loved. For a moment the noise of the patio faded. Naomi felt his attention like a warm light breaking through cloud. She didn't know who he was, or why her violin mattered to him, or why he seemed untouched by the coldness around them. But something in his gaze made her pause. Micah tugged her coat, whispering, "Mama, are we in trouble?" Naomi swallowed hard. "No, baby," she answered softly, though her voice shook. "We're just in the wrong place." The manager stepped closer, preparing to push the issue. Guests leaned in, waiting for the spectacle to end. Naomi pulled Micah's hand and turned toward the sidewalk, but the man at the end of the table shifted in his seat, and Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't watching them leave. He was watching her violin. A question flickered through her mind, unexpected and impossibly out of place on a night like this. Who is he? And why does he see the one thing no one else ever notices? The wind pushed gently against the patio curtains as Naomi tightened her grip on Micah's hand. She wanted to disappear back into the street, into the dark where no one called her out or judged her. But something held her still, a small tremor in the air, like a string on her violin vibrating before a note is struck. The man at the end of the table didn't look away from her instrument. His posture was composed, the kind that came from a lifetime of rooms where everyone listened when he spoke. The other diners shifted uneasily, waiting for him to dismiss her or ignore her completely. Yet he did neither. Instead, he slowly set down his fork, dabbed the corner of his mouth with a linen napkin, and lifted his eyes to Naomi's face as if truly seeing her for the first time. Before Naomi could decide whether to stay or go, the manager stepped forward again, impatience sharpening his voice. "Sir, I'll escort them out immediately." His fingers twitched toward Naomi's arm. He didn't get the chance. "Let them stay." The man's voice was calm, deep, almost gentle, but it cut through the patio like a command bell. Conversations halted. The manager froze. Even the heaters hummed quieter beneath the weight of his words. Naomi blinked. "Sir, we don't want any trouble," she whispered, tugging Micah closer. She wasn't afraid of leaving. She was afraid of staying, afraid of being seen in a place that treated her visibility like a crime. The man held her gaze for a long, steady moment. Then he gestured toward the 2 empty chairs beside his. "Bring them seats," he said to the staff, "and a warm meal." His tone wasn't arrogant or patronizing. It simply left no room for debate. A nearby guest murmured, "Is he serious?" Another hissed under her breath, "Elias Beaumont never does this." And suddenly, the name clicked. Naomi felt her breath catch. Elias Beaumont, the tech magnate, the man behind half the city's innovation centers, a billionaire with a reputation for being brilliant, private, and utterly unreachable. He lived in a world so far above hers that calling them separate worlds felt generous, more like separate atmospheres. Why would someone like him intervene? "We can't accommodate," the manager began again, but Elias lifted one hand slightly. "Bring them chairs." The words weren't loud, but the authority in them settled the matter instantly. 2 servers hurried to clear space at the long table. The diners, trapped between curiosity and discomfort, shifted subtly away from the empty seats as if poverty were contagious. Micah looked up at Naomi with wide eyes, whispering, "Mama, are we eating here?" His voice held a trembling hope Naomi wasn't sure she had the heart to break. She shook her head quickly. "We shouldn't. This isn't for us." Pride and fear tangled in her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Thank you, sir, but we don't belong here." Elias tilted his head. "Why not?" The question stunned her, not because she didn't have an answer, but because no one had ever bothered to ask it gently before. "We just don't," she managed. "People like us, we're not welcome." The air tightened. A woman in diamonds sucked in a breath as if Naomi had said something vulgar. A man muttered, "This is absurd." The manager's lips thinned into a line so sharp it could cut glass. But Elias, he didn't flinch. He instead looked down at the violin case again. "Tell me," he asked quietly, "is that your instrument?" The patio lights flickered off the worn wood, catching every scratch, every taped corner. Naomi felt vulnerable, exposed. That violin was the last piece of her mother she had left, the only thing she hadn't pawned when life tightened its grip around her throat. "Yes," she said softly. "It's mine. May I ask how long you've played?" Naomi hesitated, unsure whether the question was genuine or another kind of test. "Since I was a kid. My mama taught me." "And you still play now?" She nodded, feeling the weight of her exhaustion. "On the street, at the train station, wherever people don't mind me being invisible." Something flickered in Elias's expression. Not pity, but recognition. A small thaw in his carefully composed face, as though her words brushed against something buried in him. Then he turned to the manager. "Are the chairs coming?" The man swallowed. Yes, sir. Of course." 2 chairs were placed beside Elias, the servers stepping back quickly, as if afraid to be too close to Naomi's patched coat or Micah's worn sneakers. Naomi remained standing, unsure whether to sit or run. Elias noticed her hesitation. "Please," he said, and this time his voice softened further. "This isn't charity. It's an invitation." That distinction struck her, hard. She looked at Micah, who stared longingly at a fresh basket of bread being set on the table. His small hand squeezed hers, silently begging for permission. Naomi's stomach twisted. They hadn't eaten since morning. Hunger gnawed at both of them. Yet sitting felt like stepping into a spotlight she wasn't ready for. But Micah's eyes, they were too hopeful to ignore. Before she could choose, Elias leaned slightly toward her. "If it helps," he said, almost in a whisper meant only for her, "I didn't notice you because you walked in. I noticed you because of what you carry." Naomi frowned, confused. "Your violin," he said simply. "People often overlook what's valuable." Her breath caught. Invisible. Not invisible. Seen. Not seen. "Sit?" Naomi exhaled slowly. "Surrendering, sit?" Naomi exhaled slowly, surrendering to the moment. "Okay, baby." They moved toward the chairs as the diners shrank back, their disapproval a silent storm pressing against her skin. She kept her chin lifted, though her heart pounded hard enough to shake her bones. As she helped Micah climb into the tall chair, she felt Elias's eyes on her again. Not predatory, not judgmental, but searching. Why? Why her violin? Why now? Before she found the courage to speak, Elias rested his hands lightly on the table and asked her a question that froze her mid-breath. "Would you consider offering something instead of accepting a meal?" Naomi stared at him. "What? What do you mean?" Elias nodded toward the violin case. "I'd like to hear you play." The world around her fell still. He wasn't offering food. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering dignity. But the patio had become a stage she never asked for, surrounded by people who wished she would disappear. Naomi swallowed hard, feeling her pulse thrum through her temples. Was she really going to do this? Here? And why did this stranger, this billionaire, want to hear her? She barely had time to breathe before the manager, flustered and pale, blurted out, "Sir, surely you don't mean she can't just—" Elias didn't even look at him. "Let her decide." Everything went silent again. The wealthy diners stared. Micah held her hand tightly, and Naomi Carter's fingers brushed the old violin case, trembling, not from fear alone, but from something deeper, something that felt almost like possibility. The patio heaters hummed softly, pushing a thin warmth into the winter night. But Naomi barely felt it. Every nerve in her body was alive, bright, electric. She could feel the stares, the questions hanging in the air, the unspoken judgment curling around her like smoke. The diners leaned back in their chairs, making space for her as if she carried some invisible weight that might spill onto them. Even Micah watched her, hope tugging at his small features, though he didn't fully understand what was unfolding. Naomi slowly unfastened the worn clasps. The sound was soft, a tiny metallic click, but to her it echoed louder than the conversations that had stopped minutes ago. She lifted the case lid gently, almost reverently, revealing the violin inside. The wood was scratched, the varnish faded in patches, but under the patio lights it still glowed like something sacred. She swallowed hard. "Sir, I don't take charity," she whispered, more to herself than to Elias. Elias Beaumont didn't flinch. His gray eyes were steady, calm, utterly present in a way that unnerved her. "I know," he said, "and that's not what this is." From the other end of the table came a derisive snort. A man in a navy blazer muttered, "This is ridiculous. We came here to eat, not watch, whatever this is." The manager seized the moment. "Mr. Beaumont, please. Your guests are uncomfortable. Perhaps we should—" Elias lifted a hand. The manager went silent, as if someone had pressed a mute button. Naomi glanced at Micah again. His eyes were wide, sparkling with a mixture of hunger and awe. "Mama," he whispered, "he wants you to play." Naomi's throat tightened. She had played on cold subway platforms, in echoing tunnels, outside grocery stores where people walked past her like she was part of the sidewalk. She had played through grief, through hunger, through heartbreak. But never had she played for people who seemed to think they were too important to hear her. She inhaled slowly. Her mother's voice brushed through her memory, soft and warm. "If you play with truth, baby, somebody will hear you, even if it's just God." She lifted the violin from the case. Her fingers settled into familiar places, the curve of the neck, the worn grooves shaped by years of holding on when life tried to take everything else. She raised the bow, and the restaurant's soft lighting flickered across the strings like sunrise on water. A server, uncertain of what to do, froze mid-step with a tray of wine glasses. Naomi took one more breath. But before she could play, the manager stepped forward again, shoulders stiff. "Ma'am, I must insist. This is not an appropriate place for—" Elias didn't look at him. "You're interrupting," he said simply. The manager stuttered, But, enough." The single word was quiet, but it dropped like a stone. A few diners exchanged uneasy glances. Some were annoyed. A few were curious. One or two leaned forward, sensing something unexpected. Naomi lifted her chin, tasting the first flicker of courage in her chest. She looked at the manager directly, something she rarely did with men who held power over her, and said, "I'm not here to cause trouble." He hesitated, somewhere between anger and embarrassment. "Then what are you here to do?" he snapped. Her response surprised even her. "Offer something." The heaters hummed. The patio fell still. Naomi positioned the violin beneath her chin, the bow poised just above the strings. Micah held his breath. The diners held their judgment. Elias held her in his quiet, unwavering gaze. But then, just as she prepared to draw the bow, doubt crashed over her. What was she doing? Playing for these people? People who wouldn't look at her on the street? People who thought of her as a disturbance, an inconvenience? Her heart thudded painfully. Her arms trembled. She lowered the violin a fraction. I can't do this," she murmured. Elias leaned in, voice low enough for only her to hear. "You can, and you should. Not for them. For yourself." Naomi stared at him, breath shallow. The sincerity in his tone cut straight through her uncertainty. No one had spoken to her like that in years. Not with quiet belief, not with recognition. Before she could answer, a woman at the table folded her arms. Honestly, Elias, why are you entertaining this? There are places for people like her. The words landed like a slap. Naomi's jaw tightened. Micah shrank in his chair, eyes darting nervously, and suddenly, something inside Naomi snapped into place. Not anger, not pride. Something older, deeper. A decision. She lifted the violin again. Elias leaned back slowly, as if he knew the moment had tipped. The woman in diamonds scoffed. "Oh, for heavens!" Naomi cut through her complaint, not with words, but with the first trembling note of her bow. Except the bow hadn't touched the strings yet. She was still frozen in that breath right before action. Her arms still trembled, but in that breath, she felt it. A pulse of resolve, a fragile thread of belief. She straightened her spine. Then she said the words that would change everything. "This isn't charity. This is respect." A ripple moved through the patio, shock, discomfort, something close to shame on a few faces. The manager recoiled as if she'd overstepped. The diners stiffened. Elias smiled. Just barely, but enough for Naomi to see she had said the right thing. She raised the bow again, her fingers steadier now. Just as the bow touched the strings, something unexpected happened. Micah whispered, "Mama, make them hear you." The note she had been holding inside for years tightened in her chest, and Naomi began to play. A single trembling note drifted out over the white tablecloths, soft but piercing, like the beginning of a confession. The patio fell completely silent. Naomi held that first note as if she were holding her breath underwater, her fingers trembling but sure, her bow gliding across the strings with the quiet desperation of someone who had only one chance left in the world. The sound quivered in the cold air before blooming into something fuller, warmer. It seeped between chairs, around glasses of wine, through jeweled bracelets and expensive watches. It wrapped around the people who moments earlier wished she would disappear. She didn't look at them. She didn't look at the manager hovering stiffly near the entrance. She didn't even look at Elias, though she felt his gaze as steady as a hand on her shoulder. Instead, she closed her eyes. Chicago disappeared. The cold disappeared. The weight of being judged disappeared. And she played. Her bow dug deeper into the strings, shaping the melody her mother had taught her on nights when the electricity flickered, when the world outside their apartment felt too loud and too cruel. Naomi played the way her mother had said real musicians must play, not for applause, but because the music needed somewhere to go. The first notes were soft, mournful, a memory, a plea. Then the tempo shifted, swelling like something breaking free. Conversations stopped. A server froze in place, holding a tray of sparkling water. Even the heaters seemed to quiet themselves, humming lower, gentler, as though listening. A woman in diamonds lowered her fork slowly, her eyes locked on Naomi. A man who moments earlier had scoffed at her leaned forward involuntarily, his brows furrowed. Someone near the back exhaled shakily, the sound catching like a sob. Micah sat with his small hands clasped tightly under his chin, watching his mother with awe. She looked different to him in that moment. Taller somehow, brighter, wrapped in that golden glow that always appeared whenever she played. She was nervous, yes, but also powerful in a way that made his chest feel too full. The notes climbed higher, curling through the golden patio lights, brushing against the rafters, echoing off the glass walls. She shifted the bow again, and the melody dropped into something tender, a softness so delicate it felt like it could shatter with the wrong breath. Then silence. A breath between notes. a moment where the whole patio leaned in, waiting. Naomi let the bow fall gently into the next phrase. This time the music was fuller, bolder, rising like dawn pushing back the night. She poured into it every hunger she had carried, every fear she had swallowed, every humiliation she had endured, every act of quiet love that no one ever saw. She played the ache of being unseen, the grief of being forgotten, the tenderness of still choosing to be kind anyway. Her fingers moved with a kind of truth that needed no translation. When she reached the final crescendo, her bow lifted, trembling, and a hush deeper than before settled over the room. She let the last note fade naturally, drifting into the night until even the wind seemed to pause for it. Naomi lowered her violin. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. No applause, no sneers, no impatient calls for the check. Just silence so thick and reverent, it made her chest tighten. Then a woman near the center whispered, almost to herself, "Where did she learn to play like that?" A man murmured, "That wasn't street playing. That was, good God, that was art." Another voice, softer, "She must have been trained. You can't hide technique like that." Naomi's eyes opened slowly. She felt exposed, raw, as if she'd carved open her chest and let everyone look inside. She didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, violin at her side, waiting for the air to settle. Elias Beaumont pressed his fingertips together, studying her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even impressed in the way rich people were impressed when something novel crossed their path. He looked, moved, the kind of moved that came from recognition, not discovery. Naomi swallowed hard. Her voice, when it came, was steady but soft. "Music belongs to everyone," she said, "even people you don't see." The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water. The ripples were immediate. A woman lowered her eyes. One man's jaw tightened. Another shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The truth of what she'd said settled into the room heavier than any melody. Micah squeezed her hand. He didn't fully understand the meaning, but he felt it in the air. The way grown-ups froze. The way his mother's voice carried something fierce and gentle all at once. The woman in diamonds glanced away, blinking faster than usual. The man who'd scoffed earlier cleared his throat, unable to meet Naomi's gaze. The manager took a step back, his expression cracking into uncertainty. And then, slowly, Elias rose. He didn't clap. He didn't speak. He simply stood and turned toward the manager with a quietness that somehow struck harder than anger. "You will not disrespect her again," he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was absolute. The manager's face went pale. The diners stiffened. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Something had shifted. Something real. Something irreversible. And as that truth settled, the question returned to her mind. Stronger now. Louder. Impossible to ignore. Who is this man? And why does he see me when no one else ever has? The question pulsed through Naomi's mind as the last echoes of her music faded into the night air. The patio at Lumiere, once filled with soft laughter, clinking glasses, and murmured conversations, now stood frozen, as if someone had pressed pause on an entire room full of strangers. The diners shifted uneasily, glancing between Naomi and Elias like they had stumbled into a story they didn't understand. The manager, face flushed and jaw tight, forced a thin smile. "Mr. Beaumont," he began, voice straining with false politeness, "with all due respect, this establishment has standards. Our guests didn't come here for—" Elias raised a hand. The small gesture cut off the manager's sentence more cleanly than a slammed door. Naomi could almost hear the man swallow his pride. Elias took a slow breath, settling his palms on the linen tablecloth as though grounding himself in the moment. "She played beautifully," he said quietly. The manager blinked. "Be that as it may. But what you said earlier," Elias continued, turning his head just enough to meet the man's eyes. "Disrespected her. And her son." A flush crept up the manager's neck. "Sir, I was only trying to maintain an environment our clientele expects." "An environment that excludes kindness?" Elias asked, his tone still measured, almost gentle. "Or dignity?" The manager's lips twitched. His gaze darted around the patio, searching for support, but all he found were diners avoiding his eyes. A few guests nodded subtly toward Elias, as if silently urging him to continue. Others looked down at their plates, ashamed. Micah, who had been clutching his mother's hand tightly, whispered, "Mama, what's happening?" "Hush, baby," Naomi murmured, brushing his forehead. "It's all right." But even she wasn't sure. The manager attempted to recover. "Mr. Beaumont, sir, you know how our clientele can be. Allowing this," he gestured vaguely toward Naomi, as though pointing directly at her would contaminate him, "may discourage future patrons." Naomi felt heat flash across her face. Not anger yet, but a familiar sting. The ache of being categorized, reduced, pushed aside. Beside her, Micah's fingers tightened again. Elias's expression didn't change. If anything, it softened. "I see," he said calmly. "So you judged these two because you assumed your patrons needed protection from them?" A murmur swept across the tables. The manager stuttered. That's not what I meant." Elias leaned back, crossing one leg over the other with quiet deliberation. "Then please tell me what you meant." The manager opened his mouth, grasping for words, but none came. He knew, everyone knew, that he'd been caught in the open. His prejudice stood on full display under the golden patio lights. Elias lowered his napkin onto the table. "I won't dine in a place that treats people this way," he said. The manager stiffened. "Sir, please, you're fired." The words were not loud. They were not dramatic. They didn't need to be. They were final. A collective gasp rippled through the patio. A woman covered her mouth. A man nearly dropped his wineglass. Even the servers froze, their eyes widening as if they had just witnessed thunder without the lightning that should have caused it. The manager went pale. "Mr. Beaumont, surely, sir, you cannot—" "I can," Elias replied calmly. "And I just did." Silence swallowed the patio whole. The manager stumbled backward. Shock splashed across his features. He looked almost smaller now, deflated, stripped of the authority he had wielded so sharply only moments ago. Naomi watched him, her own breath trembling in her chest. She didn't want this man humiliated, didn't want revenge or spectacle. But she couldn't deny the truth rising in her. What he had said was wrong. And for once, someone powerful had said so too. Elias turned toward Naomi and Micah then, the hard edges in his expression softening into something warm. "Sit," he said gently, motioning toward the chairs beside him. "You haven't eaten yet." The words caught Naomi off guard. She blinked, unsure how to respond. "Sir, after all that, I don't want to cause more trouble." "You didn't cause trouble," Elias replied. "You revealed it." He nodded to the servers, who scrambled into motion, placing warm plates in front of her and Micah, as though eager to erase the room's earlier cruelty. The smell of roasted vegetables and buttered rolls wafted up, making Micah swallow visibly. Naomi pulled out a chair slowly, her movements cautious, uncertain. She eased Micah into his seat first, smoothing back his hair. Then she sat down beside him, her violin resting across her lap like a protective shield. The diners around them tried to resume their conversations, but the room felt altered, quieter, heavier, as if everyone sensed they had witnessed something they weren't sure how to describe. Naomi picked up her fork with trembling fingers. Micah reached for a roll, glancing at her for permission. When she nodded, relief washed over his little face. As she finally took a breath, Elias spoke softly, just loud enough for her to hear. "I meant what I said. You played beautifully." Naomi met his gaze. In his eyes she saw no pity, no fascination, no condescension, only respect, and that unnerved her more than anything else. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice unsteady. I don't know what to say." "You don't owe me anything," he replied. For a long moment, neither spoke. Naomi focused on helping Micah eat, trying to still the tremor in her hands. But one question lingered in her chest, growing louder with every passing second. Why would a billionaire defend a woman the world barely saw? Why her? As if sensing the question rising inside her, Elias reached into his coat pocket, pulled out something small, and set it gently near her plate. A simple white business card. He tapped it once. "Come tomorrow," he said quietly. "I have something for you." Naomi stared at the card, her heartbeat stumbling, skipping, accelerating. She wasn't sure whether to pick it up, push it away, or run from it entirely. What could a man like him possibly want from someone like her? And why did a few simple words suddenly feel like the first crack of a door she never believed she'd be allowed to touch? Naomi stared at the business card resting beside her plate, the crisp white rectangle glowing softly under the patio lights. It looked so out of place next to her trembling fingers, next to Micah's small hands tearing a roll into soft pieces, next to the life she'd been carrying on her back, like a weight she no longer questioned. The card felt unreal, like it belonged in a different world, one with warm coats, full fridges, and doors that opened instead of slammed shut. She didn't pick it up. Not yet. The servers moved around them quietly, almost reverently, setting down plates as if afraid any sudden movement might disturb the fragile shift in atmosphere. Naomi caught a glimpse of the former manager disappearing inside the restaurant, shoulders hunched, the echo of his fall from authority lingering in the cool night air. She felt no triumph from it, only a strange sadness. Humiliation wasn't something she ever wished on anyone. She knew too well how it tasted. But Elias, he had done it anyway. For her and Micah. That unsettled her most of all. He cleared his throat softly, drawing her attention. "I hope you don't mind," he said, his tone gentle. "But I asked them to bring you something warm. You both looked cold." Naomi blinked, unsure how to receive such simple kindness from such an unexpected source. We're grateful," she murmured, glancing down as steam curled upward from the roasted chicken and vegetables placed before her. It smelled like comfort, like childhood, safety, memory. Micah took a big bite, cheeks round with warmth. "Mama, it's so good," he whispered, eyes shining. Naomi smiled weakly, brushing his hair. "Eat slowly, baby." She finally lifted her own fork, but her eyes kept drifting toward Elias across the table. The patio around them remained muted, as if the wealthy diners understood instinctively that something private was happening, something delicate, quiet, not meant for their interruption. After a few moments, Elias leaned forward slightly. "You said earlier you played on the street," he said. "Train stations, sidewalks." He paused. "Why there?" Naomi stiffened. She hadn't meant for him to remember that detail, let alone ask about it. But there was no judgment in his voice, only curiosity, and something softer beneath it. She swallowed. "Because music, it's the only thing I know how to do well. And people on the street, well, they don't care where you come from. They stop if the music touches them, even for a second." She hesitated. "It's the only time I don't feel invisible." Elias nodded slowly, eyes unreadable. Who taught you to play? My mom, Naomi answered, the words coming out quieter now. She had a cheap violin she bought at a pawn shop when I was little. She said music was a gift no one could take from you, not even life. And she was right, Elias murmured. A strange ache filled Naomi's chest. She passed away when I was 16. After that, I tried to apply to music schools. Got into one. But her voice wavered. Life got complicated. Elias didn't push. He didn't ask for details. He didn't pry into wounds she kept carefully stitched together. Instead, he simply waited. Like her silence wasn't empty but full of stories she didn't yet trust him with. She appreciated that more than she expected. The soft glow of the patio heaters coated his face, revealing faint lines at the corners of his eyes, lines carved from years of exhaustion rather than age. There was something lonely about him, she realized. Something disciplined, controlled, but lonely all the same. Micah finished another bite, then looked up at Elias with the unfiltered honesty only a child possessed. Why'd you help us? He asked. Naomi startled. Micah? It's okay, Elias said with a slight smile. He turned to the boy. Because your mom deserved respect, and because you looked hungry. Lots of people look hungry, Micah said simply. Yes, Elias replied, but not everyone looks kind. The words landed so gently, yet so deeply, Naomi felt them lodge beneath her ribs. No one ever called her kind. Strong, maybe. Tired, often. Surviving, always. But kind? Kindness felt like a luxury she wasn't sure she still owned. Elias picked up his water glass, swirling it thoughtfully. You played with emotion, he said. More than technique, more than training. Emotion like that comes from living through difficult things. His eyes drifted down to her violin, and surviving them. Naomi exhaled shakily. She wanted to shrink, to deflect, to disappear before he saw too much. It's not that special, she murmured. It is, Elias replied quietly, and you should stop pretending otherwise. The air grew still again, but not heavy this time. Softer, warmer. Like the patio was holding its breath for something neither of them understood yet. Naomi finally reached for the business card. Her fingertips brushed its edge, the print sharp and embossed beneath her skin. She turned it over slowly, half expecting it to dissolve in her hand, but it stayed solid, real. Beaumont Conservatory, Executive Office. The ink gleamed lightly. Her chest tightened. Why should I come tomorrow? She asked, barely above a whisper. Elias hesitated only for a second. Because talent shouldn't live on the street, he said, and because opportunity sometimes knocks in quiet ways. She shook her head. People like me don't get opportunities. People like you, Elias said softly, deserve more than you've ever been given. He didn't speak it like a promise. He spoke it like a truth he'd carried for years. Naomi looked away, her breath uneven. She felt exposed, seen in ways that made her want to retreat into the dark, yet also step toward something bright and terrifying. Mama, Micah whispered, are we going tomorrow? Naomi's throat tightened. I don't know yet. But he helped us, Micah said, and you played real pretty. She brushed a hand along his cheek. Tomorrow's a big thing, honey. We have to think about it. But even as she said it, the card warmed in her palm like a tiny ember of hope. She didn't trust hope, not after all the times it had slipped through her fingers like sand. Still, she couldn't let go of the card. The dinner settled into a quieter rhythm, though Naomi barely tasted another bite. Her thoughts were tangled threads, fear, longing, suspicion, gratitude. She glanced at Elias from time to time, searching for something she couldn't name. He didn't pressure her. He didn't boast or brag or perform the way wealthy men often did. Instead, he sat with them as if the three of them belonged at that table, in that light, on that cold Chicago night. When the meal finally ended, Elias rose and offered a small nod. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said softly. Naomi didn't answer. She couldn't. Her voice wouldn't come. But as she gathered her violin, helping Micah from the chair, the only thing she knew for certain was this. She was already considering going. Not because of the meal, not because of the humiliation he erased, not even because of the opportunity he hinted at, but because, for the first time in a very long time, someone had looked at her and seen more than struggle. Someone had seen her. The thought drifted with her all night, long after she and Micah had stepped back into the cold. Even as she tucked her son into the thin blankets they shared in their small studio apartment, even as she warmed his hands with hers and whispered goodnight, Naomi felt the echo of Elias's words deep in her chest. She barely slept. Her mind kept circling back to the white business card she'd placed on the chipped windowsill, where the moonlight touched it like a quiet blessing. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the soft tilt of Elias's head when he listened to her story, the unwavering steadiness in his gaze, the way he had defended her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. By morning, the sky hung gray and heavy with the threat of snow. Naomi rose quietly, careful not to wake Micah, and stood before the window. Her breath fogged the glass as she stared down at the street. Old brick buildings, a half-broken street lamp, early commuters wrapped in thick coats. The normalcy of it grounded her, reminding her who she was, where she came from. People like me don't get opportunities. But the card remained. "Mama?" Micah's sleepy voice broke the silence. He sat up, blinking softly, hair tousled. "Is today the day we go see the fancy man?" Naomi let out a soft breath. "He's not fancy," she said, though she knew he was, terrifyingly so. "He's just different." "A good different?" Micah asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she knelt beside him, brushing his cheek. "Let's get dressed. We'll see how the day goes." By the time they reached the towering glass building downtown, Naomi's heart was hammering so hard she felt it in her fingertips. The Beaumont Conservatory rose like something out of a different lifetime. Sleek, modern, its polished windows reflecting a sky she never thought she'd touch. Nailed bronze letters gleamed above the entrance, announcing a world she'd only glimpsed from afar. Micah pressed his hands against the glass door. "Mama, it's huge." "It is," she whispered. He looked up at her. "Are we allowed to go in?" The question nearly broke her. She swallowed hard. "We were invited." She pushed the door open before she could lose her courage. Warmth washed over them. A quiet lobby filled with soft light, Calicut marble floors, and the faint scent of polished wood. A receptionist in a navy blazer glanced up, her professional smile freezing when she saw Naomi's worn coat and Micah's second-hand sneakers. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone tight. Naomi cleared her throat. I'm here to see Mr. Beaumont. He asked me to come." The receptionist's brows lifted skeptically. "Mr. Elias Beaumont?" "Yes." The woman's smile twitched. "Do you have an appointment?" Naomi hesitated. He gave me his card." She handed it over, aware of how her fingers trembled. The receptionist inspected it as if checking for forgery. "Wait here," she said sharply, before disappearing into a hallway. Micah tugged her sleeve. "Mama, why she look at us like that?" Naomi pressed his hand gently. "Sometimes people forget how to be kind, baby. Doesn't mean you stop." Micah nodded solemnly. Moments later, footsteps echoed. The receptionist reappeared, followed by Elias himself. He moved with a quiet confidence, his charcoal coat draped over his arm, his expression softening when he saw them. "Naomi," he said warmly, "I'm glad you came." The receptionist blinked rapidly, suddenly remembering her manners. "Mr. Beaumont, I didn't realize—" "It's fine, Wendy," he said, not unkindly. "Please hold my calls." Naomi felt a strange surge of protectiveness watching the receptionist shrink under his calm tone. She wasn't angry, she was used to being doubted, but something in her liked that Elias didn't overlook it. He turned to her. "Come with me." She nodded, gripping Micah's hand as he led them through a bright hallway lined with framed photographs of concerts, young musicians, and community programs. The deeper they walked, the more Naomi sensed how much this place meant to him. It wasn't just a business. It was a living, breathing dream. He stopped at a glass door and pushed it open. "This," he said quietly, "is the conservatory." The room beyond took Naomi's breath. Sunlight poured in through towering windows, sweeping across rows of music stands, polished pianos, brass instruments resting on velvet-lined shelves. The hardwood floor glowed like honey. It looked like a cathedral built for sound. Naomi stepped inside slowly, her fingers brushing the air as though she could feel the music lingering there. Micah ran ahead, landing beside a grand piano. "Mama, look at this!" Naomi smiled faintly, but her eyes were drawn back to Elias. He stood watching her, not the room, with a softness she hadn't expected. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "It is," he agreed, "but it's missing something." She frowned. "Missing what?" "You." Her heart stumbled. Elias continued, "Naomi, your talent shouldn't live under train platforms or in the cold. You have a gift, rare, emotional, powerful. That kind of honesty in music can't be taught. It's lived." She swallowed hard. "But I didn't finish school, I never—" He shook his head. "You lived. That's more than enough." He reached into his coat, pulling out a folder, and handed it to her. Inside were documents, an offer letter, details of a teaching assistant position in the community music program, a salary that made Naomi's knees weaken, benefits she'd never imagined. "We'd start you part-time," he said. "Training included, flexible hours. And Micah—" He glanced at the boy, who was now tapping piano keys softly. "He would receive a full scholarship to our youth arts division." Naomi gripped the folder so tightly it bent beneath her fingers. "Elias, I don't understand. Why me?" "Because you deserve a chance," he said. "And because people like you lift the world in ways people like me often forget how to." Emotion surged through her. Fear, hope, disbelief, longing, all tangled together like threads she didn't know how to separate. She felt Micah hugging her leg, sensed the weight of all the nights she'd worried how to feed him, how to keep the lights on, how to keep going. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Elias stepped closer, voice gentle. "This isn't charity. It's respect for what you carry, and what you survived." Naomi closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt something impossible. A door opening. A real one. One she never knew existed. She opened her eyes, looked at Micah's hopeful face, then back at Elias, and though her voice shook when she finally spoke, it carried strength she hadn't realized she still had. "What do I have to do?" Elias smiled softly. "Show up," he said. "Tomorrow morning." The words echoed in Naomi's mind long after she and Micah stepped back outside into the gray, snow-heavy afternoon. Chicago's winter air pressed cold against her cheeks, grounding her in a reality she struggled to accept. She had just walked through a world she never imagined she'd be invited into. A world of pianos that gleamed like polished moonlight, hallways that smelled of cedar and quiet genius, windows that reached toward a sky she'd never dared to dream under. Now she stood on the sidewalk, clutching the folder Elias had handed her. It felt heavier than it should have, filled not just with paper, but with something terrifying and fragile. Hope. Mama? Micah tugged on her coat sleeve. Are you really going to work here? Naomi looked down at him, his wide brown eyes, the tiny curls peeking from beneath his knit hat, his breath puffing warm clouds into the cold air. He deserved more than she could give. He deserved a future she wasn't sure she could build alone. I'm gonna try, she whispered. He beamed, and the joy on his face made her chest ache with something sweet and painful all at once. But the next morning, when she stepped back into the conservatory, reality hit harder than the wind that had chased her there. The receptionist, Wendy, straightened stiffly when she saw Naomi, as though unsure whether yesterday's miracle was allowed to repeat itself. Mr. Beaumont is expecting you, she said, her voice polite but clipped. Naomi nodded, smoothing her coat. Her palms were sweaty, her stomach tight. She heard her own heartbeat louder than the soft classical music drifting from speakers overhead. A few young instructors passed through the lobby, one carrying a violin case, another balancing a stack of sheet music. They barely glanced at her. But then a pair of parents entered, a man in a tailored suit and a woman in a fur-lined coat. The woman's gaze swept over Naomi from head to toe, pausing on her thrift store boots, her worn gloves, her mended coat sleeve. Her lips pursed, the kind of pursing that judged silently, but harshly. "Excuse me," the woman said to Wendy, her voice pitched higher. "We were told this program maintains professional standards. We don't just let anyone walk in." Naomi stiffened. The words pricked her skin, sharp and familiar. Wendy gave a strained smile. "She's here for Mr. Beaumont." "Oh." The woman blinked, recovering just enough to force another smile. "I see." But her eyes said something else. Why would he bother? Naomi looked away. She followed Wendy down the hall, where sunlight streamed across the floor, the warmth doing little to dissolve the cold knot forming in her chest. When they reached the community music wing, kids' artwork decorated the walls, finger-painted notes, construction paper violins, scribbled rainbows. She almost smiled. Then she stepped inside the rehearsal room. Two instructors stood talking. Mark, a trumpet teacher with thick glasses, and Claire, a violin coach with perfectly straight blonde hair. They both stopped mid-conversation as Naomi entered. Claire offered a tight-lipped smile. "You must be the new assistant." Her tone squeezed the word assistant, as though it were something sticky she wished she didn't have to touch. Naomi nodded, trying to stay steady. "Yes, I'm Naomi." Mark adjusted his glasses, glanced at her violin case and said, "So, street performer, right?" The air left her lungs. He hadn't said it cruelly, but he hadn't said it kindly either. Just plainly. Like it was a label he didn't mind slapping across her forehead. "I played wherever I could," Naomi replied softly. Claire exchanged a look with Mark, the corners of her mouth tightening. "Well, don't worry. We'll get you up to speed. This isn't exactly like playing at train stations. Our kids have expectations." The shame crept back in, old, unwelcome, familiar. Before Naomi could respond, a small girl approached her. She was maybe 8, with a violin tucked under one arm and strands of her hair falling across her forehead. Her eyes were wet. "My string broke," she sniffled. Claire sighed. "We'll fix it later, honey. We're busy." But Naomi dropped to one knee before the girl could turn away. "Let me see," she said gently. The little girl handed over the violin. Naomi ran her fingers along the wood, feeling the tension in the remaining strings. "This is an easy fix," she murmured, pulling a spare string from her case. In moments, she restrung the violin, tuned it by ear, and handed it back. The girl blinked. "You made it sound pretty again." Naomi smiled softly. It already was. It just needed someone to help it along. The girl threw her arms around her unexpectedly. Naomi froze, then hugged her back, her heart softening. When she stood, Claire's expression had tightened further. We, usually have the instructors handle that, she said. Parents pay for expertise. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. The child's gratitude said enough, but the tension only thickened. As Mark and Claire began their lesson, subtle barbs floated through the air. Comments about proper technique, actual conservatory training, and professional posture. Every time Naomi corrected a bow grip or encouraged a shy student, Claire swooped in, adjusting it again, as though erasing Naomi's touch. One parent walked up to Claire during break, eyeing Naomi. Is she qualified? The woman whispered. My daughter needs real teachers. Naomi pretended not to hear. She failed. By midday, she stepped into the hallway, gripping her violin case so tightly her knuckles whitened. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe she should give the job back before she embarrassed herself further. She was near tears when a familiar voice called from the doorway. Naomi? She turned. Elias stood there. Suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up slightly, expression lined with concern. How's your first day going? Naomi opened her mouth, but no sound came. She didn't know how to tell him the truth, that the rooms were beautiful, but the people made her small, that she felt judged again, dismissed again, pushed to the margins again, just like always. So she simply said, It's a lot. Elias stepped closer, his voice lowering. Did someone make you uncomfortable? She hesitated, then shook her head. I just don't want to cause problems. Elias studied her for a long moment. Then he looked past her into the rehearsal room, where Claire was correcting a student with brisk, impatient movements. His jaw tightened, but instead of anger, his next words were soft. You belong here, Naomi, he said, even if some people don't know it yet. Naomi's breath trembled. How do you know? Because I've spent enough of my life not belonging, he replied. And I know the look. The look. The ache of being included physically, but excluded quietly. Naomi felt her throat tighten. As she stood there, caught between doubt and possibility, the rehearsal room door swung open. The little girl from earlier peeked out, violin in hand. Miss Naomi? She asked shyly. Will you sit with me when we practice again? Naomi blinked back the sting in her eyes. She nodded. The child smiled, bright, pure, unguarded, and ran back inside. And for the first time that day, Naomi felt her spine straighten. Maybe she wasn't here for the instructors. Maybe she wasn't here for the parents. Maybe she wasn't even here for Elias. Maybe she was here for the kids. Elias stepped back, sensing her steadiness return. I'll check in later, he said. Thank you, she whispered. When he walked away, Naomi breathed in deeply, squared her shoulders, and re-entered the rehearsal room. And though the whispers and glances resumed, something inside her had changed. She wasn't invisible here, not anymore. That truth carried Naomi through the following weeks, through the whispers, the sidelong glances, the tiny acts of doubt that clung to her like burrs. She wasn't welcomed by everyone, not yet. But she wasn't erased either. And for the first time in a long time, she felt her feet firmly on a path that might actually lead somewhere. The community kids adored her. They gathered around her eagerly during lessons, their small fingers hovering over fingerboards, their bows trembling with new music. They trusted her, listened to her, believed in her, something the world hadn't done for Naomi since her mother passed. She poured every ounce of herself into their progress. Soon the conservatory buzzed with talk of the upcoming winter recital. a fundraising event that would determine the next year's community arts budget. Parents talked about it with nerves. Instructors bristled with ambition. And one afternoon, as Naomi was taping finger guides onto a tiny violin, Claire entered the rehearsal room with a thin smile. "Mr. Beaumont has assigned you to lead the children's ensemble," she announced. Naomi froze. "Lead?" Claire nodded. "Yes, you'll conduct the group performance. It's unconventional, of course, given your background, but apparently Mr. Beaumont wants to showcase diverse forms of musical experience." She said the words like they were lemon seeds on her tongue. Mark added, "It's a high-stakes night. One misstep and donors vanish. So, try not to let nerves get the best of you." The dismissal stung, but Naomi kept her chin steady. Behind her, a few children gasped with excitement. "You're going to be on stage with us?" one boy asked. Naomi smiled softly. "I guess I am." In their eyes, she saw pure faith, unstained by the world's pettiness. She held onto it like a lifeline. As the recital drew near, her days became a whirlwind of rehearsals. Kids dropped strings, forgot notes, bowed too early or too late. But slowly, like snowflakes gathering, they found rhythm together. Still, every night after practice, when Naomi walked home under the orange glow of street lamps, doubt whispered in her ear, "You don't belong here." Not really. But then she'd remember Micah watching her rehearse, mimicking bow strokes with a plastic ruler while whispering, "Mama, you're amazing." And somehow, she kept going. The night of the recital arrived under a clear winter sky glazed with stars. The conservatory lobby overflowed with guests in elegant coats, sparkling jewelry, shoes so polished they reflected the chandelier lights. Naomi had borrowed a simple black dress from the program closet, a performance spare, once worn by a donor's daughter, and she kept smoothing the fabric nervously as she ushered her kids backstage. From behind the curtain, she heard voices, wealthy patrons chatting, critics taking notes, flashes from cameras. Her stomach tied itself in knots. Claire breezed by, dressed in a shimmering silver gown. "Relax," she murmured. "The children's ensemble is just a warm-up. No one expects much from them." Naomi's heart tightened. She looked at her students, fingers shaking, eyes wide, and knelt down. "Listen," she whispered. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to play with heart. That's all music really is." One little girl asked, "Are you scared, Miss Naomi?" Naomi smiled, terrified. The children blinked, surprised. "But," she added, "we're going out there together, and that makes us strong." Moments later, the stage lights dimmed. The announcer's voice filled the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Beaumont Conservatory proudly presents the Children's Ensemble, directed by Ms. Naomi Carter." A stir rippled through the audience. "Who?" they seemed to ask. Naomi inhaled. The curtains parted. White light washed over her. The hall stretched endlessly, filled with rows of donors, parents, instructors, and critics whose pens glittered like tiny swords. At the very front sat Elias, hands folded, expression gentle and unwavering. Naomi stepped onto the stage as her children filed behind her. She positioned them carefully, nodding to reassure each trembling face. She lifted her baton. Someone had placed it in her hand earlier, though she preferred her violin. But the baton felt symbolic. It meant she belonged here. Her fingers trembled. Then she saw Micah. He sat in the first row beside Wendy, his feet dangling, his little face lit with pride so fierce it made her eyes burn. "Mama," he mouthed silently. "You can do it." Emotion flooded her. Her back straightened. The baton lifted, steady at last. And then, the music began. Soft at first. Fragile. A few squeaks, a few trembling notes. But Naomi guided them gently, her movements confident and fluid. Slowly, the sound gathered warmth, texture, courage. Children who had doubted themselves now played with fire in their veins. A murmur spread through the audience. Heads tilted, pens lowered. Something unexpected was happening. The children were good. Really good. Better than anyone had predicted. Halfway through, the hall fell completely silent, save for the delicate rise and fall of young bows. Naomi felt herself melt into the rhythm, her arms shaping every phrase, her breath matching every swell of sound. She wasn't just conducting. She was speaking. Through them. When the final note hung in the air, trembling, pure, full of childlike honesty, the silence lingered and lingered. Then, a single clap, then another. Then the entire hall erupted into applause. Genuine, surprised, warm. Naomi's knees threatened to give way from relief. A well-known music critic rose to his feet. "Who trained her?" he asked aloud, incredulous. Awkward laughter rippled, people unsure whether he meant Naomi or the ensemble. Elias stood then, adding his applause, his gaze locked on her with something deeper than pride, something like recognition. Naomi bowed with her students, tears blurring the stage lights into stars. She felt the weight of every struggle she had survived, every night she had played under flickering street lamps, every time someone had told her she wasn't enough. But tonight, she was more than enough. But just as the applause swelled once more, Naomi noticed something shift near the back. A group of board members whispered urgently. One pointed toward her. Another frowned. A tremor of unease slid into her chest. The applause dimmed in her ears, replaced by a new question. What happens when people who never wanted you here realize they can no longer ignore you? Naomi stepped off the stage with her students, heart still racing from the standing ovation. The hall buzzed with excitement, parents hugging their children, instructors offering polite congratulations, camera flashes strobing through the air. But beneath all the brightness, Naomi sensed an undercurrent, a shadow threading through the crowd like cold wind slipping under a door. She caught Elias's eye from across the room. He gave her a reassuring nod before he was swept into a conversation with trustees. Naomi tried to return his smile, but something inside her had begun to tighten. Claire intercepted her. "Well done," she said, the compliment stiff as cardboard. "You certainly surprised some people." "Some people?" Naomi asked. Claire's glance flicked toward the back row where the board members stood in a tight circle. "Donors don't like surprises," she murmured. "And they definitely don't like being proven wrong on stage." Naomi swallowed hard. "All we did was play." "Sometimes," Claire said softly, "that's all it takes to disrupt a room." Before Naomi could respond, a conservatory assistant approached. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Beaumont would like you to attend the donor dinner upstairs." Her stomach dropped. A formal dinner? With the people who held the purse strings? With the people whispering about her right now? She nodded, unable to find her voice. The assistant led her up a carpeted staircase toward a private dining room, glowing with warm amber light. Through the windows, the city glimmered under fresh frost, Chicago's skyline stretching in steel-blue beauty. The room smelled of rosemary and fine wine. A long table gleamed with crystal glasses and polished silverware. The donors already seated looked up as Naomi entered, their expressions flickering from curiosity to something unreadable. Elias rose immediately. "Naomi," he said gently, pulling out a chair for her. "Please sit." She lowered herself carefully, hyper-aware of her simple black dress against a sea of tailored suits and elegant gowns. A woman at the far end leaned toward her companion. "That's her," she whispered, not quietly enough. "The assistant from the recital." The word assistant landed like a pebble in her chest. Before Naomi could steady her breath, a man in a deep navy suit addressed her directly. "Ms. Carter, is it? Where did you study before coming here?" His tone held a faint edge, polite, but probing. Naomi hesitated. I trained on my own for many years. My mother taught me when I was little. The man arched a brow. So? No formal institution? Elias shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. Another donor chimed in, swirling her wine. Talent is one thing, of course, but credentials matter in an institution like this, especially when you're working with children. The implication stung. People like you don't belong among people like us. Naomi tried to keep her voice steady. I do my very best for the students. Well, the first donor said, effort is admirable, but the conservatory has standards. A strange, calm heat rose in Naomi's chest. Less fear than something older, deeper. She'd carried it since childhood, since the first time someone decided her dreams shouldn't stretch beyond the walls of her neighborhood. She placed her fork down gently. I may not have the background you expect, she said, her voice low but steady. But I know something most music schools don't teach. Oh? The man asked, smirking. And what's that? Naomi's gaze swept across the table, across faces waiting to judge her, dismiss her, categorize her. I studied under hunger, she said softly, and hunger doesn't let you forget your lessons. Silence fell. Down. Didn't apologize. She simply held down. Didn't apologize. She simply held the truth between them, as clean and sharp as a violin string. Finally, someone spoke. A board member with silver hair and an expression carved from old stone. His voice was calm, but cold. That's poetic, he said. But we still require full background verification for all instructional staff, especially recent hires. A ripple passed through the room. Naomi's throat tightened. Verification? It's standard, he said. We need to confirm your training, your education, your history. Claire's warning echoed in her mind. Donors don't like surprises. Elias leaned forward. We can discuss this later. No, the board member interrupted. If Ms. Carter is to remain here, transparency is necessary. The words hung like frost in the warm room. Remain here. As if she were temporary, conditional. A guest who had overstayed her welcome. Naomi folded her hands to keep them from trembling. Around her, forks lifted hesitantly. Glasses clinked. Conversation restarted. But with a stiffness that hadn't been there before. Only Elias watched her closely, concern etched into the lines around his eyes. The night wore on. Dishes changed. Wine flowed. But Naomi barely tasted anything. The joy of the recital had dimmed to a faint flicker, overshadowed by a creeping dread. After dessert, as the guests began to disperse, the board member approached her once more. We'll need your documentation by Monday, he said. Any gaps in your history will be noted. He left before she could respond. Naomi stood frozen, breath caught in her chest. Documentation, history, things she had walked away from to save her family, things she had buried. Elias stepped beside her, voice soft. Naomi, don't let them shake you. We'll figure this out. She nodded, but her eyes burned. Because she knew something Elias didn't. Her past wasn't simple, and if the conservatory dug far enough, they would find the one truth she had never wanted anyone to see, a truth that could undo everything. The city felt colder the next morning, though the temperature hadn't changed. Naomi walked slowly toward the conservatory, each step heavy with the weight of what might be uncovered. Her breath fogged the air, drifting upward before vanishing completely, much like the fragile hope she had clung to these past weeks. Micah held her hand tightly. Mama, are you okay? She forced a smile down at him. Just thinking, baby. About the music show? He asked brightly. Something like that, she whispered. Inside the conservatory, Something was different. The receptionist avoided meeting her eyes. A few instructors offered polite nods that didn't reach their faces. Claire's greeting was tight, almost strained. Only the children responded with genuine warmth. "Miss Naomi?" they called. "Can we play the piece from the recital again?" Their excitement eased her heart, if only briefly. But after the morning session, Naomi was summoned to the director's office by a terse email. No explanation, no detail, just a time and a room number. Her pulse quickened as she walked down the quiet hallway lined with photographs of former prodigies and famous alumni. She felt small, like a shadow slipping through a world not meant for her. Elias was waiting inside. He stood near a wide window, hands braced on the sill, staring out at the snow-dusted courtyard. He turned when she entered, and the look in his eyes, concern threaded with a kind of protective anger, made her chest tighten. "Naomi," he said softly, "please sit." She didn't. "You know, don't you?" she asked. He hesitated. "I know enough to worry." Before she could respond, the door opened again, and the conservatory's senior administrator stepped inside. Her expression was clinical, professional, unreadable. "Miss Carter," she said, folding her hands atop a folder, "we completed the preliminary review of your background." Naomi swallowed hard. "And?" The administrator opened the folder. "We contacted the Juilliard School as part of our standard verification process to confirm your absence of formal training." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. "But," the administrator continued, "we were informed of something unexpected." A hush fell so absolute Naomi could hear her own breath. "You were awarded a full merit scholarship," the administrator said slowly. "A rare one, reserved for exceptional musicians." Elias straightened, eyes widening. The administrator went on. "According to their records, you were expected to join their entering class, until you withdrew before the semester began." She paused, studying Naomi carefully. "Would you like to explain why?" Naomi felt the air thicken around her. She sank into the chair at last, hands tightening in her lap. For years, she'd carried this truth silently. She had never spoken it aloud, not since the morning she walked away from everything she had worked for. "My little brother," she said softly. "He got sick." The administrator frowned slightly. "Sick?" "Very," Naomi whispered. "He needed someone with him full time. Our father wasn't around. Our mother had already passed. I was all he had." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "The scholarship covered tuition, but not living expenses, not medical bills, not groceries. And I couldn't leave him alone. I couldn't ask him to wait while I chased a dream." A tear slipped free, landing on her hand. "So I withdrew," she said. "And I never told anyone, because no one ever asked." Silence thickened the room. Elias moved first, taking a slow step toward her. Something fierce and gentle flickered in his gaze. "Naomi," he said quietly, "you gave up the world for someone you loved. That's not a failing. That's strength." The administrator cleared her throat, clearly taken aback. "Juilliard also noted," she added, "that your audition was one of the highest-scored submissions that year." Naomi blinked. "What?" "It seems," the administrator said carefully, "that your abilities were never a question." Elias let out a slow breath, pride softening his expression. "I knew there was something remarkable about the way you play." But if the room felt warm with revelation, a second, colder draft swept in with the administrator's next words. "However," she said, "some members of the board feel misled, believing this information should have been disclosed earlier." Naomi's stomach twisted. "I wasn't hiding anything," I just didn't think it mattered anymore. To them, the administrator said gently, everything matters. She closed the folder but didn't step away. This situation is becoming public, she added. A few reporters caught wind of the recital last night. They're asking questions about you, about your background, about why your talent wasn't recognized before. Naomi's breath caught. Public? Elias stepped forward. Let me handle that. The administrator nodded. We simply wanted to inform you before the calls begin. She left quietly, closing the door behind her. The moment she was gone, Naomi exhaled shakily. Elias, I don't want trouble. I don't want attention. I just wanted to work, to help the kids, to keep my son safe. Elias crouched beside her chair, lowering himself to her level so she couldn't look away. Naomi, he said softly, you deserve to be seen, not for your struggle, but for your strength, your talent, your kindness. Don't let anyone twist your story into something shameful. Her eyes stung again. What if the board pushes back? She whispered. What if they fire me? What if— They won't, he said firmly. Not while I'm here. She didn't fully believe him, but something in the certainty of his voice steadied her heartbeat. Still, fear lingered in her chest, a tight, unyielding knot. Before she could say more, a knock sounded at the door. A staff member poked her head inside. Mr. Beaumont, she said quietly, there's a reporter downstairs asking for Ms. Carter. Naomi went cold. Elias stood, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Let them ask, he said, because now the truth is finally on your side. Naomi didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. All she knew was this. Her life had just changed again, and the world was finally watching. But as Naomi stepped out of the conservatory office, she realized it wasn't the reporters or the board or even her past that struck fear into her chest. It was the possibility that everything she had built here, every fragile thread of hope she'd woven for herself and Micah, might unravel before it truly began. The hallway felt too bright, too quiet. Each step echoed beneath her shoes as she walked toward the stairwell, her violin case bumping gently against her leg. Downstairs, she could already hear the faint hum of voices, reporters murmuring, phones clicking, staff whispering her name with a mixture of curiosity and awe. But before she reached the staircase, Elias caught up to her. Naomi, wait. She stopped, gripping the railing. I don't know if I can do this. You don't have to face them alone, he said, stepping closer. His voice was calm, steady, grounding. I'm right here, she exhaled shakily. Why are they so interested suddenly? It was just one recital. He held her gaze. It wasn't just one recital. You moved an entire room, and people don't forget what moves them. A soft knock interrupted them. A junior staffer peeked around the corner. Mr. Beaumont, the reporters are insisting on speaking with Mrs. Carter. Elias nodded. Tell them we'll be down shortly. The staffer disappeared. Naomi pressed a hand to her forehead. I never wanted attention. I don't want to be on display. You're not, Elias said gently. You're being recognized. She didn't answer. Instead, she let him guide her downstairs, into a lobby filled with camera lenses, curious eyes, and cautious questions. The reporters didn't flood her. The conservatory staff kept them at a respectful distance. But the energy in the room shifted the moment she appeared. One reporter approached carefully, microphone lowered. Ms. Carter, is it true you once received a full scholarship to Juilliard? Naomi swallowed. Yes. Why didn't you attend? Her heart clenched. I had family responsibilities, she said softly. Sometimes, life asks you to choose. I chose my brother. The reporter nodded slowly, sympathy softening his features. Behind him, several people exchanged glances, some surprised, some moved. Another reporter stepped forward. "Do you plan to return to formal training now?" Naomi hesitated. She had never dared imagine such a question. Before she could respond, Elias gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Ms. Carter has been an extraordinary asset to this conservatory," he said. "Her future here is bright, and we intend to support her in whatever direction she chooses." The room buzzed with murmurs. Naomi's pulse steadied, anchored by the quiet certainty in his voice. When the reporters finally dispersed, she felt drained but strangely lighter, as though releasing her secret had freed a part of her she didn't realize was still caged. Elias stepped close. "There's something I still need to tell you. Will you come with me?" She nodded. He led her through the conservatory, past rehearsal rooms humming with faint melodies, past framed photographs of students who had grown into accomplished musicians, until they reached a private wing she had never entered before. At the end of the hallway was a room filled with sunlight. Its walls were lined with blueprints and photo boards, designs for community centers, music programs, outreach initiatives. Elias walked to a large easel, flipping over a sheet of paper. Naomi covered her mouth. It was a proposal draft, printed with her name. The Carter Music Fund, in honor of Evelyn Carter, supporting community youth arts programs across Chicago. She stared at him, stunned. "I don't understand," she whispered. Elias took a breath, the kind that carried years of unspoken memories. "I grew up in a children's home," he said quietly. "A place where I used to sleep with my headphones on because the only music I had came from an old radio that barely worked." Naomi's eyes widened. "I know what it means," he continued, "to feel unseen, to feel like your circumstances decide the ceiling of your life." He paused, voice softening even more. "When I saw you with that violin, I recognized something. Not the struggle, but the strength it takes to carry beauty through it." Emotion rose in Naomi's chest, sharp and warm. "You didn't just play music that night, Naomi. You showed truth. And I want children who grow up like you and me to have a chance to discover their own truth." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're naming it after my mother?" "Yes." She pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "When you spoke about her," he said, "I heard love and legacy. I'd like this fund to honor both." A small sound broke the stillness, feet pattering on the hardwood floor. Micah rushed in, eyes bright. "Mama, Mr. Elias said you're going to have a whole music place named after Grandma." Naomi laughed through her tears, pulling her son close. "Something like that, baby." Micah turned to Elias with innocent enthusiasm. "Does that mean you're part of our family now?" Naomi froze, breath catching. Elias knelt down so he was eye level with Micah. "Only," he said softly, "if your mom says yes." The world seemed to pause, quiet sunlight filling the room, warming their faces, turning tears into small, glimmering beads of light. Naomi's hand found her son's shoulder, then drifted toward Elias, her fingers brushing the sleeve of his coat. She smiled, full, deep, steady. "Yes," she whispered. In that moment, something settled in the air, something gentle, certain, and full of tomorrow. The Carter Music Fund would open within the year. Naomi would teach, perform, and help shape countless young lives. Elias would stand beside her, not as a benefactor, but as something more enduring. And as they walked out of the sunlit room together, their steps aligned like notes in a shared melody, Naomi felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Home. If a person carried kindness long enough, the world had a way of returning it, sometimes softly, sometimes suddenly, sometimes in the shape of a family you never expected. The world had watched, but now, finally, it understood. And if this story touched something in you, drop a simple 1 in the comments so we know you're here with us. Your voice helps these stories live on. Make sure to subscribe and stay close. The next story is already on its way, and I promise you won't want to miss where we go from here.